It's The World This Week, 7 days, 4 Paris-based correspondents, 1 hour. The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Foreign editor Christopher Dickey is with us. How are you, sir?
I'm doing good.
Hanging in there.
Hanging in there. Actually, barely hanging in there.
No. Yeah. Sharp as a pin, as always, is Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet.
Hello, François.
Columnist and professor of political communications these days.
Political communication at Sciences Po.
All right, the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po. Also with us, Venezuelan freelance reporter and photojournalist Sara Suarez.
Hello.
Nice to see you. And Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. Where does one find World Politics Review?
Last time I checked, it's at worldpoliticsreview.com.
All right, the World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States. Yeah, Donald Trump, the main attraction at the World Economic Forum, where he told the high and mighty of globalization, of the big corporate tax cuts he's just signed, the slashing of regulation in his first year in office, and offering a very different vision of government and globalization from the one the audience heard 2 days previous from his French counterpart.
Regulation is stealth taxation. The U.S., like many other countries, unelected bureaucrats, and we have, believe me, we have them all over the place, and they've imposed crushing and anti-business and anti-worker regulations on our citizens with no vote, no legislative debate, and no real accountability.
Christopher Dickey, your thoughts on what we heard from Mr. Trump?
Well, you know, a lot of people were saying before Trump went to Davos that he was going to be meeting a hostile audience, that the Davos was this globalizing institution of some sort. But in fact, most of the people at Davos are CEOs, and a lot of them are billionaires. And he was right at home with them. He just gave them, the Americans, an enormous tax cut. He took all these really rich people and he made them a hell of a lot richer. Gee, are we surprised that they applauded him when he spoke? Of course. But the other thing that I thought was really interesting at Davos is that once again we see Macron, the French president, playing the role of the Trump whisperer. He's sort of saying things to Trump, including saying things to Trump like, you should come to Davos, you should meet people at Davos. And it's interesting that their positions, although on things like climate change, the famous differences are wide, on questions like reducing bureaucracy, trying to lower taxes, they are more or less preaching the same line. And, of course, that's what Macron uses to influence Trump.
But they don't have, as we just heard from that clip we just played, they don't have the same vision of government. Macron's in favor of streamlining, but he doesn't rail against unelected bureaucrats, as he calls them.
No. Well, they don't have the same vision of government, and frankly, they're very different. But Macron manipulates Trump. And you can
Macron manipulates Trump.
Oh, yes, he absolutely does. You can see him do it. When he invited, this is not original with me. When he invited Trump to the Bastille Day celebrations, for instance, and all that pomp and circumstance, Trump eats that stuff up. He calls Trump on his private phone. He talks to Trump in English. Trump has made him the first world leader to be invited to the United States on an official state visit. What more do you need as an indication?
I definitely say to the degree that Trump can be manipulated because he's so unpredictable and he's so susceptible to really the last person he speaks to before he hits a microphone adopting their position. But yeah, I think that Macron has played the board really well. And it sort of reminds me of the way Nicolas Sarkozy played the impopularity of George W. Bush at the time. He was totally isolated, and Sarkozy decided being an isolated American president's only friend in Europe is a good position. I think Macron had the same calculation. He decided and figured that he could be upfront. He was definitely courageous with Putin the week before and with Trump the first time he met both of them. He disagreed with them upfront in private, but he didn't press it. He tried to move their lines, move Trump's lines as much as he could, but he made it clear that he had a friendly welcome, and I think that Trump really desires that kind of respect.
In his interview with Swiss, he says these amazing things about Trump, and you think Trump just doesn't hear them or get them. In his interview with Swiss TV, he was asked, "Is Trump dangerous?" And he said, "Well, you know, he is unpredictable, and that makes people feel insecure, but I've never caught him in the act of incoherence." So, I mean, what?
All right. Well, if I could just add one thing, and I think that there's a danger in terms of the opposition to Trump, because there's a lot of the opposition to Trump wants Trump to be a sort of deranged, senile, crazy person, and he's not. He's incoherent on a lot of policy issues. He's uninformed on a lot of policy issues, but he's perfectly able to go to Davos, charm a dinner meeting with a bunch of CEOs, charm Macron, or be charmed by Macron. He's made it this far in life. He's not someone who can't engage socially with other people.
All right, on that,
I don't think he's charmed by Macron. I think Macron is not competing with him, and that makes a big difference. He's not fighting to get his place or other thing. Trump is Trump, and Macron knows he doesn't need to compete with that. Let him be Trump, and I'll be the replacement of Obama, which that's the position he's interested in.
But
so that's completely different.
But it is a whole new world. Exhibit A, talking about this point. On Wednesday, Trump's finance secretary, Steve Mnuchin, says a weak dollar, that's good for the U.S. economy. Markets react to it, and now on Friday, the same Mnuchin, after some prodding from his boss, saying exactly the opposite. What does that tell you, Philippe Moreau?
They don't care about logic in their discourse. They don't care about anything that used to be the rule. They don't respect any rules in the speech.
Yeah, but in this case, it moved markets.
But they know how to manipulate the opinion. They know how to move very fast on unpredictable fields, so that they are always ahead of their opponents. It's true that we shouldn't take Donald Trump for a fool or for an imbecile or for someone that would be weak. He could perfectly well be re-elected during the next election. He knows exactly what to play, what to say, how to act, to be ahead of the opinion. All the time he's ahead of his opponents. They don't even manage to compete against him. And that's the main common trait between Trump and Macron. Different styles, but the result of these styles is exactly the same. They don't have any real opposition.
I'll say this, too, about Trump and his welcome at Davos. Given what the expectations and the fears were for his first year, it hasn't been catastrophic.
Exactly.
And especially, as you said, for global CEOs, he's made it more attractive to invest in the U.S. He's made it more attractive to make money in the U.S. He hasn't blown up global trade. To the contrary, there's been, even though the U.S. has been sidelined on some major deals.
But his Commerce Secretary this week warned that those tariffs put on washing machines and solar panels could just be the beginning.
The next year is going to be a dangerous one in terms of whether he follows through on some of those more destructive promises. But the truth is, there was nothing, first of all, anyone who expected him to get booed out of Davos hasn't been paying attention. The playbook on Trump is flatter him to his face, try to work around him behind his back, and take advantage of the giveaways that he's giving. And all these people here at Davos, they have nothing to complain about Donald Trump so far.
I've been to Davos many times. Maybe I just forgot, but I've never seen a brass band announcing the presence of a head of state. I mean, that was like Nixonian in its weird comic opera.
It's the global financial version of the Saudi sword dance.
Yeah.
On Thursday evening, Trump hosted a dinner at the World Economic Forum for 15 top European business executives. Ahead of his speech, France's president did one better, hosting a dinner for 140 of the world's biggest bosses. Dateline, the Palace of Versailles Monday. Yes, before flying into Davos, Macron wined and dined CEOs that included heads of Google, Microsoft, Facebook. Sorry, Suarez, your thoughts on how Macron played Davos?
Well, I'm not especially interested in this choice he's making always of taking everybody to Versailles. I mean, the press here always talk about Jupiter and all these names that we have.
He compared himself to Jupiter. He wanted a Jupiterian presidency.
Exactly, that position of distance and the little king and everything that he's been called, all those things. And he keeps choosing Versailles as the place to receive
some of those CEOs said they loved it. They were quoted in Politico.
Because they love to be part of the royalty. Yeah. So this new royalty he's trying to make is a royalty, is a business royalty that he's building here. So and that's perfect for him, and it's working very well for him.
There is something fundamental in what you say. There is a new elite that is gaining power, gaining strength.
Absolutely.
An elite whose model is the one that we see in California around the Silicon Valley. They don't believe in politics anymore. They don't care about politics. They only care about business. And politics is a side thing we can do in order to achieve our business goals. But Google can do everything. And exactly is, in that sense, a new elite rising.
There are two things that Christopher and Sarai said that I think that I wanted to just follow up on. First of all, the idea that the approaches of Macron and Trump, even though their language is very different, their actual policy approaches are similar
on some issues,
and on the business climate and on taxes. And the idea that Macron wants Obama's position and not Trump's, and I think that the problem for Macron is that. It's great. People want to invest in France, especially if taxes go down, and the French workers are really well trained, and there's a lot of really high-powered, high-tech entrepreneurs and business here. But it's not the same kind of magnet as the American economy. And so Macron really needs Europe to compete, as it were, with what Trump can offer in terms of the American market. And that's where he's playing a weaker hand because of the uncertainty in Germany right now, and also whether or not he'll get what he wants in terms of his European
All right, and Trump likes bilateral trade. Macron, when he's sitting with the CEOs of Facebook and Google and all that, knows that it's a multilateral world, or a globalized world, if you will. During his speech, the French president pleaded for what he called a global compact to, and these are his words, make profits more ethical, and to rethink as well the way companies are taxed, included the value added on some of those same companies that he wined and dined at Versailles.
But let us not be naive. Today, globalization in general is going through a major crisis. And this global challenge requires, for sure, a collective effort from international organizations, states, companies, civil society, in order to find and implement solutions.
The only time during that speech where he pointedly threw down the gauntlet to the United States was he said, I want the U.S. and China to sign on to a multilateral deal on taxes, on harmonizing taxes. And it's an important issue with what Philippe was mentioning, which is these Silicon Valley giants, which somehow rule the world without paying much tax.
Well, yeah, but there are several issues. One is that they can move their money around in a way that they don't have to pay many taxes. They take advantage of every legal loophole, and they succeed. I mean, when you've got that much money, you can keep a lot of it.
Which Apple just did. They
which
moved
Apple
hundreds
just
of
did.
billions back to the U.S.
They do it again and again. But there's another factor, too, which is that with the corporate tax in the United States taking this huge hit and going so far down, that's going to put a lot of pressure on other governments, other countries, to lower their taxes as well.
A race to the bottom?
It'll be a race to the bottom, and the Americans, precisely because America is a much more freewheeling economy than almost any other economy in the world that you could talk about, and developed economy, it is going to draw a lot of people, and it will be a threat to France.
And just one more word on Macron's approach to global trade, because he's multilateralist in the sense that France is part of the EU, which is a multilateral trading bloc. But the EU has been making bilateral deals, as it were, between the EU and Japan, for instance, which is similar to Trump's approach. The EU, Macron was just in China.
Not a nation; it's a group of nations.
It's a group, but that's France's position. But it's operating not with other groups of nations; it's operating with other single nations. And when Macron went to China recently, he spoke a pretty tough game about China's abuse of some of those trade rules, similarly to what Trump has done and what Europe is doing in general. Europe's being a lot more aggressive with China. So there's more similarities, I think, there than the rhetoric leads you to believe.
I wanted to come back to something Judah was talking about earlier, where he was saying things are not as bad as people feared they would be a year ago.
Economically, let's say.
No, in a lot of ways they're not as bad. But I was actually stunned to be talking to Ken Roth from Human Rights Watch the other night, and he was making the same argument. He was saying, and he's no Trump fan at all, but he was saying, the resistance is holding up and things are not as bad as they could be. And I thought, well, we really are in a process of normalizing Donald Trump.
And that's good, because then you can fight against him efficiently. Otherwise, he's just kind of a monster that eats you all the time.
Well, that was sort of what Ken Roth was saying.
All right, it's also sort of a low bar, right? The world has not been blown up or fallen apart. That's sort of what you expect from an American president. The idea that that's a big triumph.
It may be a low bar, but the more people are used to him, the more likely he'll be reelected in 2020.
All right, and he's got a challenge coming up in the next year, and it could be on Turkey's border with Syria. Stay with us. When we come back, we'll be taking a look at that offensive by the Turks and the war of words that's starting to brew.
Because a new page of history gets written every day. Because breaking news can't wait. Information. Everywhere, in all situations, on every subject. Understanding the world. Imagining the world. France 24, a different take on the news. Revisited, presented by Stuart Norval.
The election of Adama Barrow in 2016 filled Gambians with hope. After 22 years of autocratic rule, Yahya Jammeh was beaten in the elections. His expulsion from the country drew a curtain on a past stained by imprisonment, murder and corruption. But will the new Gambia promised by the president live up to expectations?
Revisited on France 24 and France24.com.
We are journalists, and normally you have to listen to us, but you have things to tell us too. Maybe you've experienced a dramatic event, or you've got something important to say. You want to make a difference. That is why we created The Observers. Now, the first step is very easy. You get in touch with our team. Send us your images, tell us what you've seen. And then it's our job to get your voice out there, on our site, on social networks, on your mobiles and tablets, and on TV, of course. You can appear in our weekly show via webcam. Or perhaps we'll come see you in person, where you live, in your country, your town, and we'll work together on a report for our investigative show, The Observers Direct. So you get the idea. This show is your show, your way to get your voice out to the world.
Welcome back. Before we resume the world this week, some of the stories Tom Burgess-Watson is watching for you in the newsroom. In Davos, Donald Trump warns the United States, quote, will no longer turn a blind eye to unfair trade practices. France and others denounced the barring of Venezuela's main opposition coalition from April's presidential elections. This as Spain retaliates after the expulsion of its ambassador to Caracas. The Seine still rising in Paris after weeks of near-record rainfall. The river on course to peak Saturday. It's wreaking havoc with mass transit. We'll tell you about that. And the greatest names in French cooking in Lyon for the funeral of Paul Bocuse, the world's first celebrity chef, the father of Nouvelle Cuisine, was 91. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Christopher Dickey foreign editor of Said the Daily Beast, is with us. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, who's a columnist and teaching these days at
political communication at Sciences Po.
Political communication. How is it different from regular communication?
It's very different because we don't have any money in political communication, so we have to be imaginative.
Okay.
In France, we don't have.
All right. Also with us, Venezuelan reporter and photojournalist Sara Suarez, and Judah Grunstein of World Politics Review, its editor-in-chief. We were talking about the pitfalls. Judah was mentioning the pitfalls when it comes to world trade that awaits Donald Trump in 2018. He's also perhaps on a collision course with NATO ally Turkey. The president of Turkey launching Operation Olive Branch. It's a bit of a misnomer, since it began with the pounding and shelling of villages on the Syrian side of the border in Afrin province. Kurdish YPG forces control that enclave. They've been fighting ISIS, but Ankara accuses them of being one and the same as the Turkish PKK insurgency. Recep Tayyip Erdogan insists his next target is Manjib. Manjib is an Arab-majority town that's also under YPG control. Manjib, which happens to be inside of that U.S. protection zone. And if Washington doesn't like it, well, tough.
We will continue the Olive Branch operation, which is on its 7th day today, until we reach all of our targets. After this, we will cleanse Manbij from the terrorists, as it had been promised to us. Nobody should be bothered by this. Because the real owner of Manbij is not those terrorists, but our Arab brothers there. After that, we will continue our fight until no terrorist is left within northern Syria until the border with Iraq.
Chris Radicki, the real owners of Manjib are not the terrorists, but our Arab brothers.
Yeah, I mean, look, this is an area that's been fought over and fought over. I think let's turn the clock back a little bit. 2014, the so-called Islamic State is on a roll. They take Mosul, the second biggest city in Iraq. They've already got Raqqa in Syria. And there is one place that they want to take. It's a town called Kobani, not far from Manbij. And the Turkish army has tanks lined up on the border. And it does absolutely nothing as the Islamic State takes over Kobani. And the only people who fought in Kobani and fought effectively were these Kurds that he's now calling terrorists. Same thing at Sinjar earlier that year. The only people that saved the Yazidis from more enslavement, more massacres, were the YPG and, in fact, the PKK, all of them terrorists in Turkey's view. They may be terrorists in Turkey's view because the PKK certainly has been fighting for decades against Ankara's government. But the fact is, the only effective fighting force on the ground that the Americans were able to work with was Kurdish. And now that ISIS has been largely eliminated, now the Turks say, well, now we want to intervene and we want to get rid of all these Kurds. I don't think the Americans can accept that. And if they do, they'll have a hell of a time finding alliances in any future proxy war.
Now, here's the tricky bit, Judah Grunstein. If we look at the map, again, that enclave of Afrin there, the YPG that's there, more affiliated in the past with Moscow than with Washington. However, Manbij is a different story. It's in the U.S.-controlled zone.
Well, basically, this Turkish invasion, because that's what it is, an offensive, it basically signals the beginning of a new phase of the Syrian civil war. There were a bunch of proxy forces, militias, an alphabet soup of militias that often changed allegiances and changed command structures without a lot of notice, oftentimes having accumulated American weapons before doing so. And it was a very confused battlefront or battleground. With the Russian intervention, as much it was attacked and criticized by America, by the Obama administration, they really started going after not ISIS, which America and the American-led coalition was attacking. They started going after all of these intermediate militias to simplify the battlefield and to clear them out and to make it essentially pro-regime, anti-regime. Understanding that eventually, in the end game, there was going to be a lot of complicated corrections going on. For instance, Turkey is going in to attack the Kurdish forces in the current intervention. The militias that they're defending and that they're allied with in this operation and in that region, in Anjib, are against the Assad regime. So Russia and Iran and the Assad regime already have a complicated situation because they're going to have to eventually negotiate with the militias that Turkey is supporting. The U.S. is supporting the Kurds in the eastern part of the frontier. The Kurds have an unspoken tacit agreement with the Assad regime. And that started in the beginning of the civil war. The Kurds and the Assad regime agreed essentially not to fight each other and to leave that for later on.
Just
to finish one point, there's a lot of complicated and contradictory things going on in this phase that they're going to have to negotiate. And everyone's fighting right now to have a piece of land in Syria with their proxies in control so that when the negotiations take place around the table, they can be at the table also.
Yeah, but there's another thing that happened, which is that the Americans, now that ISIS is pretty much out of the way, the Americans declared that they were going to create a 30,000 soldier force in the area around Manbij, that big area.
There's 2,000 U.S.
to be trained and assisted by 2,000 U.S. special forces on the ground, who are already on the ground, and that would be a border force. The minute the Turks heard that, they said, oh, no, you're not. And after a few days, actually, the Pentagon or the White House was rolling this back and saying, no, that's not quite what we're going to do.
And just to follow up on what we were talking about before, things aren't so bad economically under the Trump administration, but this continued failure to coordinate their communication geopolitically and in terms of military issues, whether it's North Korea or Syria, is an extreme weakness right now in terms of the American position, because one person says one thing, the next day someone else says another, and it causes, if it's Mnuchin talking about the dollar, it causes markets to fall. If it's Tillerson talking about a permanent border force, it causes Turkey to intervene. These are really serious communication problems that have really serious political consequences.
And of course, one scenario is that everybody gets bogged down. It's no given that the Turks will even be able to get their way in Afrin, and it's no given, Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet, that the U.S. will succeed in bolstering that force in the other part of northern Syria.
As you say, the U.S. have a major problem is that they don't have any common language. We don't know really what they want to achieve. Obama was building a lot kind of theory of what America should do abroad. He was kind of teaching it like on a moral perspective. In a moral perspective, we don't see anything from Trump except one change after the other. That's his way of doing things. I'm not too sure that it would be less efficient than the Obama way, but it's a lot more frightening because we can't really read it from the outside. But it's a communication strategy, I think.
One side note from all of this was in Germany, people upset when they saw German tanks being used, German tanks that were sold to the Turks, and it's created this whole debate over there about weapons sales.
The German public does not love Recep Tayyip Erdogan at all. They don't like him at all. And in fact, most of Europe is beginning to believe that, maybe he's a powerful nationalist, but he doesn't really have any part in Europe. So the idea that he's using NATO tanks, European tanks, to intervene in Syria,
German tanks in this instance.
German tanks, to intervene in Syria on a mission to eliminate his Kurdish opposition. No, you're right. They're not happy about that in Germany.
We're going to switch continents. He was a figurehead of Brazil's boom years, and even though Lula suffered a legal setback Wednesday with an appeals court upholding a corruption conviction that could land him in jail, attack proving the best defense for the Workers' Party leader. He's been formally endorsed by the party he founded to run for his old job in next October's presidential race. The now 72-year-old Lula standing alongside his ousted successor, Dilma Rousseff, at a rally where he promised more legal and political fights to come, comparing his struggle to none other than that of Nelson Mandela.
A human being can be imprisoned. Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years. But his fight did not decrease because of that. He returned and became president of South Africa.
Sorry, Suarez, where does this leave Lula at this point? What are your thoughts on the fact that here he is at 72, fighting the courts and aiming for a comeback?
I think this is a typical case in Latin America that we're having today, where celebrity is getting on everything. He is one of these very famous presidents who got by populism measures everywhere, like Chavez did, like other presidents did around, and now he's trying to do this coming back in order to hit the opposition and say, hey, you know, guys, you have done all this, but I'm still here, I'm still alive, and I'm going to fight for this. Odebrecht has been all around the place because we have cases of corruptions in Venezuela.
Yeah, it's
Peru,
Odebrecht being that construction company which is tied to the Lava Jato scandal in Brazil, but it goes way beyond Brazil.
It goes way beyond, and all the countries in Latin America are related in a way or another way to that cases of corruption. The money was spread in the whole continent, and that's amazing how they put money in key places everywhere in order to gain power, to keep controlling the economy of the region. And Lula is not out of that game.
Yeah, look at this map here where it shows places where Odebrecht is involved. We could have extended that map to Angola and Mozambique, but that would have been outside of Latin America as well.
It's just amazing.
And it's incredible how this one construction firm could be at the heart of so much.
It's also, to me, what's incredible is that I remember in the mid-2000s, even until recently, when they won the World Cup and the Olympics, Brazil was like it was like the global star, right? The emerging economy.
The BRICS.
It was the B in BRICS.
But at the time, I remember a contributor for us who was a Brazil expert. He shared this, it's like a Brazil watcher's saying that Brazil is the country of the future and it always will be. And I didn't quite understand it at the time until now. They always seem to have an ability to shoot themselves in the foot. In this case, it's just been this 5-year string of just scandal, of economic downturn, of the impeachment of Rousseff. The current president Temer, I think he's polling in popularity is in the single digits. With the editors, the editorial room, we have this expression called the Somalia problem. And it's basically when a country is in such bad shape that more news of bad shape just isn't really news. What do you do with it? Brazil is now in the Somalia problem range of problems in terms of the economy, in terms of the politics, in terms of the corruption. And the big problem really is that Brazil being such a regional heavyweight, when you have stuff going on like Venezuela, and when you have a lot of things going on in the continent with the Trump administration not paying very much attention, it leaves this huge vacuum in terms of actually having the diplomatic capital to deal with it.
When we discussed this in the France 24 debate on Thursday, Philippe Monchevrolet, we had Brazilians on, and they were, sort of saying a lot of painting a dark picture, but saying as well, this proves we're in this new era of transparency. Odebrecht undone by the fact that there are more levers these days to uncover kickbacks, including the Swiss authorities doing a lot to uncover the scandal.
That's true, but we're entering a zone where we know everything, but it's not always effective. I mean, we know, but that doesn't change. And in a way, it's even worse because we know that this guy is corrupt. When he's been elected, he was like this worker guy. He was in a blue suit, and he was elected. And it was a tremendous hope for the whole region that it could be elected president. It was like a big change. There were talks about the continent was going left, and it was accepted, and it was working and everything. it has been ruined by this corruption scandal. He's even running again for presidency, even though we all know he's not Nelson Mandela, because Nelson Mandela has never been employed in a corruption scandal. Maybe some people around him, but not Nelson Mandela. There is nothing common between Nelson Mandela and Lula. And we know everything, but it doesn't seem to make a difference. It's like with Trump. We know he's grabbing girls.
So it's turning people off politics.
But we don't oust him. It's even worse because we know everything, but we don't seem to be able to do anything about it. That's the thing missing. But it's a transitional period.
I think Brazil is also a very particular case because everybody is wildly corrupt in Brazil.
The entire Congress.
I mean, the entire Congress, the people who ousted Lula, the people who were prosecuting Lula, the people who ousted Dilma Rousseff, they're incredibly corrupt.
Even Rousseff, at the beginning of her first term, I think she had to, within the first year, 7 of her cabinet officials had to resign because of corruption charges.
I mean, there's this, like the clean hands, the manipuliti in Italy, there's this prosecutorial process that has gone on and that has identified lots and lots and lots of corrupt people. And, you know, ultimately the entire system is discredited. And in Italy, what did we get? After all that house cleaning, we got Berlusconi.
Yeah, because the people don't believe in it anymore. So they might as well vote for the nicer corrupt guy.
Yeah. All right, just before we move on, a quick word about what's happening with Brazil's neighbor to the north. Venezuela's government moving up presidential elections this week, Suarez. Then the Supreme Court barring the Democratic Unity Roundtable Coalition from taking part in the poll that's scheduled to be held before the end of April. Where's it all going to lead?
This is the beginning of 2018. We haven't even finished January. And you're missing a point. There were 7 people killed by the government in the first days of the month, too. I mean, we're living a horrible situation in the country, and we are not even at the end of the month of January. So this is promising to be a very difficult month for Venezuela, a very difficult year for Venezuela. Because obviously these people in the government have no intentions of having real elections. We are going to vote again, but voting in Venezuela doesn't mean elect anything. You're not electing anything. They already made the decisions, and Nicolás Maduro already said he's going to be the next president again. He's gonna replace himself to keep moving to the beautiful future that he's built to Venezuela, meaning hungry, killing his own people because of the lack of medicines, and killing the economy and destroying the country, as he's been doing for the last 5 years.
Before we go, those who knew him called him Monsieur Paul. He died in the same room where he was born 91 years ago. Some of the greatest names in French cuisine acting as pallbearers for Paul Bocuse at his funeral in Lyon. Bocuse became the first celebrity chef upending traditional cooking and its heavy sauces, leading in the 60s and 70s the Nouvelle Cuisine school that would put the accent on the ingredients.
We stuff the sea bass, we put pistachios inside, then cover it with puff pastry, and then bake it for 25 minutes. Mr. Paul's legacy includes all these legendary dishes we learned that we prepared 1,000 times as he watched over us.
Mr. Bocuse worked in a team. He never worked alone. So he would come, buy products from small vendors, and be friends with us. He would give us work.
Philippe Moreau-Chauvelet, what does it say about France, this funeral?
A lot, because he was the first star chef, and he exported the art of cuisine all around the world. He was the model for the chef in, the Disney movie.
Ratatouille, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And he was the guy pictured in the movie. He's like a worldwide symbol. And there is a school in France, Bocuse School. It's attracting hundreds of applicants from everywhere around the globe. I mean, Japan, Middle East, US even. So we have everyone coming to Bocuse. It's like the first international French brand on the cuisine scene, in the gastronomy scene. And he was very French up to the point that he had 3 wives, and everyone knew about it, and it was well accepted.
He said he was faithful to the 3 women in his life.
What?
He said he was faithful to the 3 women in his life.
Yes, that's very French. You have to be French to understand that.
Faithful or fateful?
Faithful, maybe.
And Suarez, he said once, butter is a magical ingredient.
Well, I agree. I completely agree. No, he was a great person, really. I mean, he made all these changes in the gastronomy. He made know France by that tradition that when you live in France, you understand how important the food is in this country and how important the tradition of cooking is in this country. So he really is a big person for France.
We don't believe in politics anymore, but we still believe in food.
That
Okay.
always, yeah.
We're going to leave it
That
there.
will not change.
Oh, you riot over Nutella.
Christopher Dickey, Sarah Suarez, Judah Grunstein. Stay with us. Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Emma James.
Hi there.
The floodwaters are rising in the French capital.
They are indeed, yes, keeping a close eye on them because they're expected to peak tomorrow. Estimates of around 6.2 metres in height, which is pretty severe. It has everybody with a camera heading out into Paris to try to capture images like these. That one, a particularly artsy photograph from earlier today. This one of the more bizarre. This catfish-type creature was fished out close to the Notre Dame Cathedral today. Apparently, he was 2 metres long. But wow. I know. I imagine that the floodwaters is making it perhaps a little easier to get your hands on that kind of thing, should you wish to. This, I think, is probably one of my favourite photographs because it's a very unusual view of the statue that everyone talks about the minute there's a threat of a flood in Paris, and it's the Zouave on the Pont de l'Alma. I've spoken about him before because only 18 months ago, June 2016, this was the cartoon done by the late, great Baudry, which I used then, and of course the Zouave is always the star of the show whenever this happens, and you've got him there.
As the water rises, when it's above his feet, you know there's a flood.
Yes, and it's well above his feet right now.
Above his knees.
Indeed.
Above his chest, right? Or at his chest.
It's rising rapidly. We've had a little bit of respite today because there's been no rain.
Yeah.
But there is more rain on the way in the coming days, so we'll wait and see exactly how that plays out. This is a more typical view of the Zouave, slightly tricky to see with the sunlight coming in from behind the Eiffel Tower. But as you can see, people are lined up all along that bridge for a view of exactly what's happening with the Seine. And this is the comparison, really, of how things looked in 1910 when it was the really great floods that paralysed Paris. And that year, it went up to 8.62 metres. Now, we're talking about possibly 6.2 metres tomorrow, so there is, as you can see, a big difference. Not quite as different as those two photographs make it look, because actually the bridge, when it was rebuilt in 1974, it was raised by 60 centimetres, so the difference isn't as great as it does appear there. But yes, certainly a lot of people talking about the possibility of the flood of the century, and also some rather apocalyptic headlines, really, from Les Echos, talking about there's a risk of chaos in the coming days. And they talk about why is there a second flood within 18 months. They talk about climate change, yes, but also, as the old song goes, pave paradise, put up a parking lot. Too many things have been concreted over, and basically the water is just has nowhere to soak away to anymore. Lots of people, though, sharing old photos from 1910. As you can see, we are a long way from that kind of image. And final note on this one, my favourite image from days gone by. The way we go to work as the River Seine rises to new heights, never surrender. And just take a look at that gentleman about to take to the waters in the Seine.
I'm not sure I would do the same.
No.
Emma, before we let you go, what's the buzz on Davos?
Well, quite a lot of people talking, obviously, about Donald Trump. It was much awaited, and certainly the man can pull a crowd. This is the queue an hour before his speech with people. It's this gentleman saying it has the feeling of teenagers queuing for a concert, but these are billionaires and CEOs. So very, very unusual scenes there, really. Donald Trump himself felt it all went very well. Speech on America's economic revival was well received. Many of the people I met will be investing in the USA, he says. However, not everyone agreed about that speech. This Twitter user saying, this is what happens when you sack Steve Bannon. Boring. And also this gentleman saying it was delivered in the exact monotone delivery favoured by my 9-year-olds, begrudgingly droning out their reading homework.
Oh, dear.
Not all negative, though. Nigel Farage, the former leader of the UK Independence Party, said that Trump was superb. If only we, the UK, had a leader that could inspire confidence.
If only, yeah.
Indeed. But the thing that really has everyone talking is the fact that he was briefly booed and there was laughter.
Twice, says our own Stephen Carroll.
Yes, and it's not the the biggest round of booing you've ever heard in your life, that's for sure, but a lot of people talking about it because what he said during some questions and answer sessions, it wasn't until I became a politician that I realised how nasty, how mean, how vicious and how fake the press can
From what
be.
I understand, it was the press that booed him, though.
Yeah, of course
well,
it was. It wasn't the billionaires booing.
This person saying that the boos were very tepid. As much as I hate to admit it, he was on point. And this Twitter user saying exactly that. But note, they are called @RussianBot90. You forgot to mention it was the journalists that booed him and that the audience actually laughed, and some even turned around and booed the journalists. I don't suppose anyone's going to agree on quite who said what or who did what, but there you go.
We could talk about it long into the night. Many thanks, Emma James. I want to thank our panel again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.